Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Driving to Zero in Pharma Manufacturing Wastewater, Part 2. My name is Goran Sparika, VP of Engineering at Axine Water Technologies, and I will be your host. Please submit your questions anonymously using the Q&A button or publicly using the chat feature. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible during the session. After the webinar, we will distribute the questions and answers to all attendees. With that, I'll turn it over to our moderator, Chris Morrison.
Thanks so much, Goran, and good morning to our webinar attendees, and good afternoon to those people calling in from Europe. My name is Chris Morrison, and today we're going to be on a fast-paced, 45-minute, really insightful journey in pharma, water, and sustainability. As most of you know, Axine is a tech-enabled Canadian-based water treatment firm with operations in Europe and the Americas. But today, we're going to be talking about wastewater and pharma plants. A couple of quick notes in housekeeping. We're amazed at the high enrollment. We have a total of almost 300 people on these webinars from over 30 countries joining us. For privacy and confidentiality reasons, all webinar attendees will not be able to see the names or faces of anybody else on the call. All microphones are actually muted, but you can ask questions anonymously, as Goran said, via the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you want to use the chat feature instead, that's an alternative, but your name will be visible to all. At the end of this seminar or webinar, I will have a couple of questions that are fairly common that Krista and I will be going over. And our Director of American Sales, Krista Ramirez, and our European Sales Leader, Laurent Gendry, are on this call, and we'll be setting out the webinar recording and Q&A questions in the next couple of weeks. So you will all going to get a complete deck that you're going to see today. So please don't worry about trying to take any screenshots or copy anything. We have working agreements with many global pharma companies and have signed NDAs with many of you. So if you're not aware whether or not your firm has done that, please let us know, and we'll let you, we'll either advance it if it hasn't been done, or we'll include you in that umbrella. One of the most important things is many of you have specific questions for your facility, and we're more than willing to do this presentation with a smaller or broader group within your team so that you can confidentially ask your specific questions. We know that's a big deal for many of you, so no problem in doing that. And lastly, at the end of the seminar, we will ask you for some feedback. How did we do? And please, all feedback is appreciated. Help us make it better before. So before I introduce our speaker today, just a quick, you may be interested in why I got excited about Axine Water. I spent 35 years in industrial water and innovation with Ecolab in Europe and Asia and North America. And in 2015, when I was running our innovation group over there, I was introduced to Axine. I then retired and have become an advisor and finally a board member at Axine. And I'm truly inspired by what this technology can do and how it can provide sustainability to manufacturing plants around the world. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Krista Ramirez. She leads our pharmaceutical market development business in the Americas, working directly with pharma manufacturing plants to develop and implement on-site wastewater treatment solution. She has an extensive background and experience in industrial wastewater in many different industries, and she brings a pragmatic approach to these complex problems. She's fluent in English and Spanish. Today she's going to be in English, and she's spent most of her career in Latin America in addition to the US and Europe. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Krista, and would you please start us off?
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Goran, for starting us off this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today for part 2 of our Driving to Zero in Pharma Wastewater webinar series. If you missed part 1, there is a recording available on our YouTube channel. And part one gives a high level overview of the market trends and just Axine in general. So that's available. If you need help finding that, by all means, reach out to me or Laurent to find that. And then thanks again to everybody on the call here today that participated in our pre-webinar survey. We got a lot of terrific feedback, and I think it was really valuable for us in shaping this webinar. So I hope that we're able to get you what you're interested in today's presentation. And with that, let's dive in. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera so I'm not a distraction for this, and you can focus on the content. So before we get started, like Chris said, this is going to be fast paced and we've got a lot of ground to cover. But before that, I know there's a lot of folks in attendance that we haven't met with before. So I'll do a quick intro on Axine. Chris obviously gave a little background, but just to shed a little more light. At Axine, we're dedicated to treating the world's toughest organics. So we're focused on treating APIs, solvents, and PFAS. We're based out of Vancouver, Canada. And we've got a team spread across North America and Europe. As Chris said, Laurent, my colleague in Europe, is on the call here today, and his information will be available at the end of the presentation if you've got any questions for him. So here's what we're going to cover today. Again, it's going to be fast paced. We're not going to go super in depth into all of these, but give you a little bit of everything here on what it takes to bring one of these projects to life. We're going to start with PNEC assessments. From there, we'll move on to wastewater strategy, stream segregation versus whole plant effluent, system design criteria, and everything that feeds up into that. Things like technology selection, treatability testing, CapEx versus OpEx strategy, and performance guarantees. The next few minutes or so might be a little overwhelming for you guys. I'll try not to get too deep into this, but I feel it's really important that we start from the beginning, which is PI impact assessment. So why do a PI impact assessment? Pharmaceuticals in the environment can be found in nanograms per liter and micrograms per liter concentrations. The Pharmacovigilance dashboard that you see here on the right reports on 39 APIs measured environmental concentrations, and nearly 53% of the APIs are detectable in the environment. And while only about 2% of pharmaceuticals in the environment is actually attributed to the production of pharmaceuticals, it's in our area of influence. And so according to your responses in the pre-webinar survey, 50% of you have PI or PNEC goals at your site. So this is clearly something that you all are working towards, and we are working towards, of course. So PI assessments may be facilitated or even carried out by an internal or external subject matter expert. That's not something that Axine does. But I do think a broad understanding of what this entails is really important for anyone on this call so that you know what you're getting into. So often the driving force of achieving PNEC or predicted no effect concentration is coming from corporate ESG commitments, and those commitments are incredibly admirable, but of course they're no easy undertaking. So first we need to determine how much API is going to end up in the environment. You're going to do this by doing a mass balance calculation as well as a PEC, a predicted environmental concentration calculation. And next, we need to determine what API level in the environment will not produce any impact. So you'll calculate a PNEC, a predicted no effect concentration. And lastly, you'll compare that PEC to the PNEC to determine your RQ value or your risk quotient value. If your RQ value is less than 1, there is no immediate action required. If it's greater than 1, environmental impact is anticipated and action would need to be taken. And so I realize that's a lot of acronyms to digest there. As Chris said, don't worry about it. You're going to get a copy of this deck and there'll be a recording that you can go back through and review this. And also, like I said, this isn't meant to be a deep dive where you've got it all figured out in this short amount of time today, but rather just a reminder of how involved these PI impact assessments are and some of just the foundational building blocks of them. So once you've done your PI impact assessment and you end up with, let's say you end up with an RQ that's greater than 1, what do you do next? You need to reduce your losses to wastewater. So things like eliminating discharge, implementing dry cleaning practices. And once you've done this, then you would recalculate your RQ again. And if it's still greater than 1, you'll need to collect the wastewater at point of generation and recalculate again. And if it's still greater than 1, this is where someone like Axine could come in to help. You want to make modifications or additions to your wastewater treatment plant or to remove the APIs. And I just want to note that items 1, 2, 3 under PI impact assessment and items 1 and 2 under the risk quotient reduction approaches are not services that Axine offers. We certainly are knowledgeable on this, but we are by no means experts on it. And there are some other really great resources out there that you guys can consult. And so I'll share those here. A couple of them, first and foremost, I recommend consulting the PSCI, the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative. They've got some great archived webinars on these topics. I believe there's 4 parts to that series. And I've linked that here. So again, when you get a copy of this hyperlink should take you directly to where those are located. If you have troubles locating them, let me know. And then some of you may have seen, if you haven't seen, the AMR Industry Alliance just announced yesterday that they've got their antibiotic manufacturing standard. And so I've updated that here. There's a link to that. It's hot off the press. And lastly, if you've got not lastly, there's 2 more things. If you've got, of course, an internal SME, usually those are at your corporate headquarters. They might be water experts or they might be toxicologists, who knows? They have a lot of different titles, but you usually would have somebody who is very knowledgeable in this and can walk you through it. And of course, there are lots of third-party consulting engineering firms that also offer these services. So a lot of ways and a lot of people out there that can help you with this. This is not something that you should take on alone. It is definitely a very involved process. So moving on to wastewater treatment strategy. We're going to look at an example here of a facility where 2 approaches were considered. So the whole plant effluent and then segregated effluent. And here we're looking at whole plant effluent. Jordan Aders at GBA was kind enough to share some conceptual diagrams of a segregation project. And so that's what we see here on the right-hand side of the slide. In this example, the flow rate is about 100,000 gallons per day or 378 meters cubed per day. And as you can see here, we've got black dotted lines that are coming from production and office, lab, cafeteria. It's going to be coming from bathrooms everywhere. And it's all getting pumped to a treatment system. And because of the large volume, as well as the variety of sources that this water is coming from, you would likely need multiple treatment technologies, such as biological treatments, pre-treatment, followed by API polishing, when we're talking about a treatment system here to make this happen. And in this case, the API polishing could be accomplished with an Axine treatment system. So as an alternative, they've considered a second option, which would be segregating the API. So here you're going to see that there's the black dotted lines again, as before, coming from the office, the labs, the warehouse, cafeteria, etc. And you'll see that they're going straight to the city sewer, direct discharge. But you're going to also see we've got some new red lines here. And those are going to a treatment system. And so the difference from before to now is that in this case, they're taking the first rinse from production and they're bringing that to the treatment system. Whereas the rest of the areas, the office, the lab, the cafeteria, etc., is going straight to the city sewer. The other difference here is you'll see we've still got these black dotted lines connected to production. Subsequent rinses have an RQ of less than 1. And so they're able to actually discharge those directly to the city sewer. So we've got rinse 1 going to the treatment system and subsequent rinses in all other areas of the facility going directly to the sewer. And so with that ends up giving us a reduction of more than 90% to the flow rate. So bring it from about 100,000 gallons per day down to 6,000 gallons per day, or about 23 cubic meters per day. So that's pretty significant reduction. So just to kind of summarize that, we'll do a quick side-by-side comparison of these 2 alternatives. If this site would have chosen to treat the whole effluent without any API segregation, it would have resulted in 4 times greater OpEx and CapEx costs, 5 times larger or more system footprint that takes up incredibly valuable space that could be used for revenue generating activities. And this is an uncommon approach. At Axine, we've yet to see a pharma plant choose this approach. And on the other hand, by electing to segregate the API contaminated effluent, the site's able to isolate the problem. And the problem is that there's an RQ of greater than 1. So they reduce that volume to treat by more than 90% by segregating it and by isolating that first rinse. And that then results in about 75% lower OpEx and CapEx. The treatment system footprint's reduced by 80%, and it ends up being a really economic and technically viable approach. Now, based on the responses that you all gave us for the pre-webinar survey, 64% of you have segregated clean in place wastewater. So that's fantastic. You are off to a good start because that is, it's a tremendous undertaking to do this, but it's a very important one and worthwhile one, as you can see. So now that we've talked about the different treatment strategies, the whole effluent versus the segregation, let's talk about treatment options. We're going to review traditional treatment options first, and you'll notice once I put these up here that Axine and our technology, our approach isn't listed as an option here, and it's because we're not traditional. Rather, we've created a new standard for treatment, and we'll get to that, but for now, we'll take a look at these two traditional approaches, which are separation and destruction. When I think of separation, I think of it as moving the problem, where you use evaporation, membranes, or activated carbon. All are going to end up having concentration or a concentrate or contaminated media that's going to require disposal. So the APIs won't actually have been treated or destroyed, rather they'll be concentrated and collected. And in the case of traditional destruction methods, there's of course incineration, which is typically expensive and doesn't align with ESG goals. Other options include AOP or advanced oxidation processes or biological treatment technologies. In both cases, a deep understanding of oxidation capability and byproducts that are a result of the process is required. Now, because of time limitations, we're not going to take a deep dive into any of these. But as Chris mentioned earlier, if you want to talk about these, we've got a fantastic, brilliant team of engineers that can help us sort through these and weigh the alternatives with you. So as we discussed, there are currently two common approaches we see in dealing with wastewater at pharma plants. So there's direct discharge and offsite trucking and incineration. Those are by far the two most common things that we see happening right now. And as you know, it's likely because most APIs aren't regulated around the world. People like yourselves, the organizations you work for, and organizations like PSCI and AMR Industry Alliance, as I mentioned earlier, are really leading the charge in demonstrating good stewardship and good manufacturing practices. Trucking and incineration pose a lot of risk and create residual environmental issues that don't align with overarching ESG goals. And the direct discharge, of course, can result in permit violations, which cause bad PR, they're costly, and they create risk exposure. So as I've said, Axine's created a new standard for treating persistent organics in industrial wastewater. We aren't moving the problem, we're destroying it on site. We're talking about zero impact, zero solid discharge, zero APIs are going off site. So now that we've seen some of our traditional treatment options, we're going to dive into our solution, which I teased a little bit here, which is electrochemical oxidation. Electrochemical oxidation is a powerful oxidation process that can break the most stable bonds. It results in a total destruction solution. So when we talk about those traditional options versus this, there's not a lot that do total destruction, as you saw. This is a simple illustration here on the left-hand side that shows the oxidation process. It works by applying electrical currents to advanced catalysts, which generate mixed oxidants and hydroxyl radicals. When the water is flowing across the surface of our electrodes, which that black line there represents that, the surface of our electrodes, the pollutants are oxidized both directly and indirectly. We can completely mineralize and destroy virtually any type of API, solvent, cleaning solution. We have not seen an organic that we can't treat. We mineralize them back to their basic building blocks. So you've got their hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide. We do require an electrolyte for the process to work, which we'll see here in a little bit with some of our case studies. And I should note, with those trace byproducts, they really are trace. We have not seen that that any sites that we work with have needed to alter any of their air permits with this. Here we've got an illustration of our standard electrooxidation process. This is at the center of all our systems. Electrodes are packaged into reactors, as you can see in this middle photo here. and it's integrated with power supply, controls, and automation software into a modular unit process. The wastewater is treated in a sequenced batch process. We circulate that water through the reactors, as we talked about on that previous slide, until that treatment is achieved. And you can see we've got these green dots here in the upper left, and that signifies the monitored data points. So things like pH, ORP, temperature, amperage, and so on. Depending on the application requirements, we package our electro-oxidation unit with standard off-the-shelf pre-treatment and post-treatment solutions, providing you with a custom turnkey solution. These can include standard ultrafiltration, pH adjustment, reverse osmosis, and whatever else would be needed, complementary treatment systems that would be required depending on what your treatment goals are. We build those systems in our production facility in Vancouver and ship them to the site for installation. These can be skid mounted or containerized, as you see in that illustration on the slide here. Everything, like I said, is modular, it's scalable, it's automated, and it's remotely monitored 24/7 by our team. Let's talk about treatability testing. This part of our project development process includes, it is really important, and it's important not just for our project development process, but for any, whether it's Axine's technology or any other type of technology or solution out there. If you're going to be attempting to treat or concentrate or evaporate whatever this wastewater, you must do treatability testing because you need to be certain that this will work. So this is a very important step. It's part of all of our project development processes. And this and or piloting, those are the two alternatives that you could do to accomplish this. So treatability testing is done to verify the preliminary estimates and obtain data required for final system design. This is going to show us any discrepancies in the wastewater. We can identify if any additional pre or post treatment is required and determine any organics mass removal required in order to achieve the treatment objectives and guarantee performance. So typically this testing is done at our lab in Vancouver. Occasionally testing would be done by piloting on site. The reason we would do that would be for situations where contaminants are degrading rapidly, or so they wouldn't maybe be representative by the time they arrive at our facility, or maybe it's a controlled substance. In that case, piloting would be a more appropriate approach. So once we've received the samples, we perform analysis to confirm that the composition of the wastewater and we determine if any pre-treatment steps are required. We're also evaluating, like I said, if there's any degradation, if so, how much has occurred during that treatment process. And once we deem the samples are representative, they're then run through our pilot scale system, which you can see in the lower right-hand corner of the slide here in that picture. And so one question that a lot of people ask is how much water do we need to receive from the site to run treatability testing? And that's really going to vary. So you can see in the upper right-hand corner here, some pallets of some 55-gallon drums. So that is what we typically have our customers send us for the treatability testing. And it's really going to depend on the site, on their APIs, the number of APIs, the concentrations. Are they single stream? Are they all mixed together in some kind of super cocktail that will determine how much we need? It could be, two drums, it could be 16 drums, and anything in between. So that's something that we'll do on a case-by-case basis, and we'll walk you through the whole process when the time comes for that. We sample throughout the treatment runs to evaluate compositional changes during the treatment. So this helps us determine how much treatment time and how much organic mass removal is required to reach treatment objectives. And those treatment objectives could be overall organic mass removal, API removal, passing a whole effluent toxicity test. It could be any or all of those. The graph on the right here, this is really important, and you'll see more of these graphs in the upcoming case studies. The graph on the right here shows the sampling of the API and COD over the runtime and where the API treatment objective was achieved. So you can see on the left-hand side here, we've got COD expressed in milligrams per liter, and we've got API on the right side expressed in nanograms per liter, and we've got runtime on the bottom here. So we've got COD is plotted in blue, and API is plotted in red. And you can see over the runtime how we are reducing and removing both the COD and the APIs from the wastewater. And we hit our target here of 66 micrograms per liter of API at the same time that we've removed 92% of COD reduction. So COD removal and API removal come hand in hand here. Here we've got a list of some of the pharma pollutants we can treat. Pollutants such as antibiotics and antiparasitics, hormones, opioids. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it does give you an idea of the range and scope of our technology. And here we've got some solvents and other organics that we can treat. So acetone and IPA is a really common one, methanol, surfactants. The bottom line is we've got a unique capability and the know-how to treat and destroy virtually any API and other organic to non-detection without limitation. And here we've got some anonymized treatment results. We're gonna, like I said, review some case studies in a bit, but I think this gives you a pretty big, a broad range of examples of what we can treat, the concentrations and the reduction amount. So you can see here, the API, again, it's anonymized, the unit of measure, which is micrograms per liter. And then we've got the concentration before treatment and the concentration after running through the Axine system, and then the percent reduction. And so you can see in all these cases, we've hit about 99% or more removal. And we've got this below detection limit. And then here we've got different pollutants, like we said earlier, acetone, chloroform, ammonia. And again, here the unit of measure is milligrams per liter. We've got the concentration before treatment, the concentration after treatment, and the percent reduction. So again, high removal in all these cases. So using that treatment data from the treatability testing, we can then verify and finalize treatment process design, the number of oxidation treatment units required, chemical requirements, electrical consumption, and service fees. And as we discussed, the wastewater treatment strategy, so that's that whole effluent versus segregated effluent, or the first rinse versus multiple rinse, even within a segregated effluent, along with the treatability results will determine the final solution design. And as you can see here, we offer a range of solutions that can handle small to large flows and incorporate a variety of complementary unit processes as needed. So as we discussed earlier, we've got biological treatment with pre-treatment, ultrafiltration, pH adjustment, reverse osmosis, evaporation, etc., prior to an Axine system, and then post-treatment. And so it really, depending on what your wastewater characterization is, what existing systems, treatment systems you have in place will determine what your proposal looks like here. Dive into CapEx and OpEx comparison shortly. But I think it's really important first that we have a little context on this WaaS model. So WaaS is short for Wastewater Treatment as a Service. And how does it work? So we work really closely with our customers to develop design specifications. We do this preliminary design prior to treatability testing, as we just saw, and then final design comes after that. We design, we build, finance, install, operate the system. That gives you full performance guarantee for the duration of the service contract. It gives you low project and technology risk. Like I said, it includes all service and maintenance. There's minimal capital investment. It's an incredibly cost-effective option. So essentially, to break it down and really simplify it, you're going to give Axine the wastewater to our system, and we're going to deliver it treated to your wastewater specification. And that's all you have to do. We'll take a look here now quickly at a side-by-side comparison of wastewater as a service, so a solution like Axine, capital equipment, traditional capital equipment approach, and then trucking versus incineration, or trucking and incineration, sorry. So the graph on the right here is comparing annual cost of wastewater as a service in the red, capital equipment in the gray, and trucking and incineration in the blue. On the x-axis, we've got years of operation, so years 0 through 5. And on the y-axis, we've got the annual cost. This cost question comes up a lot. We did the same presentation, another webinar last week. We offered 2 times for folks, and the cost question came up a lot. And so what I'll tell you, I'll just address that now. So what I'll tell you about the cost of the Axine system is that it varies tremendously, as we saw in those last 2 slides. There's a lot of variables that go into it. The flow, the COD, the water quality, down to, you know, hardness, and all of those things are going to determine what systems need to be part of, or what unit processes need to be part of the Axine system. And then of course the flow is really going to impact how much, how big, right? So it really runs the gamut. You know, it could be pennies a day, it could be, you know, $1 a day, or $1 a day, sorry, pennies a gallon, up to, you know, $1 a gallon, and it really runs the gamut. And so that's something that I would encourage you, if you really have burning questions about costs, to reach out to Laurent or I, and we can look at that on a case-by-case basis. And our proposal process is very quick. For that preliminary proposal that I just talked about, we can turn those around in a couple of weeks with really limited information. So I encourage you, if you've got questions about this, that we just talk about it on a case-by-case basis with your site and your data, so you have true numbers there to look at. Anyways, getting back to this slide here. So as you can see, in year 0, the capital equipment is going to have really high costs, right? Axine is going to have modest costs in the form of mobilization and site work, and then trucking and incineration will not have begun and won't have any costs associated with that. Years 1 through 5, capital equipment and the WaaS OpEx is going to be constant, whereas trucking and incineration is quite variable due to fuel surcharges. So to summarize, WaaS or Axine solution, CapEx is minimal. The site prep work is really the only CapEx involved, because the rest is all OpEx. The OpEx is predictable and consistent. You've got minimal risk and obligation at the site level. Axine owns and operates the system, therefore you don't need any dedicated personnel to operate the system. All spares and maintenance are included in the service contract, and performance is guaranteed. In the case of capital equipment, it's got that high CapEx on the front end and pretty consistent OpEx for the first 5 years. If we were to extend this graph out though, let's say 15 to 20 years, we'd start to see that maintenance cost creep quite a bit, just because it's not included in, there's no maintenance in operation included in that purchase there. This does require dedicated personnel at the site to operate and maintain the system, potentially resulting in a higher risk for meeting the performance guarantee. And lastly, with incineration, of course, it doesn't require any CapEx, and there's no dedicated site personnel that's required, but it is subject to market volatilities. We were just talking about gas prices before the call here this morning and how they're just going out of control. And then, of course, it doesn't typically align with ESG initiatives. So we're going to move on to performance guarantees. I think the best way to demonstrate this is with some real world case studies. We've got a number of examples, but for time's sake, I'm just going to go over 2. Of course, the offer stands if you want to know more things. If you're like, hey, have you ever treated XYZ? Just reach out to Laurent or I, and we're happy to share with you our experience with a variety of things, not limited just to this. But again, it's a short webinar today, so we're going to keep it brief. This first case study here is a great example of how we've helped sites eliminate offsite trucking and incineration of waste, rinse water. And in the second case study, we'll look at a site that's goal was to meet PNEC. We'll start with a little background on this site. It's an antiparasitic formulation plant for animal health, and it generates about 4,000 gallons per week, or 15 cubic meters per week. The API is ecotoxic and exceeds the discharge permit with the local municipal treatment facility. So as a result, this wastewater was historically trucked off site, but the site was experiencing frequent disruptions in the service, and cost escalations combined with that prompted a search for on-site treatment solutions. So over several months, we worked with the site to develop the project, starting with an assessment of the production process, wastewater composition, permit requirements, sampling and treatability, and then the final system design. So this resulted in the signing of a master service agreement From there, we designed, built, and installed the system that we're now operating. And I should mention, this all happened during the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic. So when the world was shutting down. You can see here in the table on the bottom left-hand side, the influent wastewater specification. So worth noting, API about 8,000 micrograms per liter, COD at about 4,000 milligrams per liter. So as we saw earlier, we do treatability testing to verify treatment performance and provide us with key data for our final system design. In this case, that goal was to reduce the APIs from the max concentration of 8,000 micrograms per liter down to about 66 micrograms per liter. So more than 99% reduction. The customer shipped us 7 drums of rinse water in those 55-gallon drums, as we saw earlier when we talked about treatability testing. For that treatability testing, in addition, a wet test was required by the local municipality. So the chart and table here show the results of the treatability testing. You might recognize this chart. It is the one that I used to tell you about treatability testing here a few slides back. So as you can see, again, I'll remind you, we've got COD on the left-hand side here in milligrams per liter. We've got APIs in micrograms per liter on the right, COD plotted in blue, APIs plotted in red, and then we've got the run time on the x-axis here. So as you can see, we achieved that 66 micrograms per liter target on the API treatment when we removed 92% of the COD. And here are the results here as well. So as discussed, we use those results from the treatability testing to design our treatment solution. This simplified process flow diagram shows the system design for this application. It's pretty simple. There's 3 steps to this process. So first, we've got conditioning step. So a batch is pulled into the tank. We use equalization tanks. So there's an equalization tank ahead of this. A batch is then pulled into this tank for conditioning, and an electrolyte such as sodium sulfate is added. And then from there, it goes to the Axine electrochemical unit. So we transfer the batch to our reactor tank, and it goes through the electrochemical reactors to oxidize and destroy the API. We analyze, like I mentioned earlier, we analyze a range of variables, including pH, ORP, temperature, voltage, current, and those data points and others in our analytics are going to tell us if the treatment is achieved. If it's achieved, it is then transferred to our treated water tank, where it is then discharged. If it's not achieved, it will get rejected and go back through that process until the treatment objective is achieved. And here we've just got an isometric diagram of what that system looks like. So we'll look at some real life examples of how this system operates in the field. So this chart shows us treatment curves for 10 sequential treatment batches during commissioning at the site. And you'll notice here, both it's same data in the graph and in the chart below. You'll notice here that it's pretty variable, right? You can see, and this is very common. And I know that when we talk with a lot of sites, they ask us, how do we handle this variability? It's incredibly normal to have this amount of variability. You guys are doing a lot of different APIs are running through your production facility and then subsequently coming into our treatment system. And so we've got to be ready to handle a lot of different things. So as you can see here, we've got high variability. So we've got, in this case, 1,500 COD coming in, milligrams per liter coming in, an API of almost 1,600 coming in. But then in a previous batch, we only had 120 COD coming in and only 19 micrograms per liter of API coming in. In all cases here, though, you can see we not only achieved the treatment objective of the 66 micrograms per liter, but we far exceeded that performance down to non-detection at less than 1 here. So system design, again, this stands true clearly for Axine, but I would say for any system that you'd be considering or evaluating for a treatment option, system design and operation has got to be robust and flexible enough to accommodate this kind of variability because it is normal. It is to be expected. So we achieved this by first developing a realistic wastewater specification, Next, we use that to design a system with sufficient headroom and spare capacity. And finally, we use that equalization tank on the front end to be able to manage any peaks and valleys of either concentrate or just flow. Here's a photo of that system installed at the customer site. Again, it was built in our facility in Vancouver, Canada, and then it was shipped to the site for installation and commissioning. We've got a master service agreement in place, which means we've got a multi-year commitment from Axine as well as from that customer, which also results in stable pricing for them. The bottom line is we've been able to successfully achieve the site's primary objective of eliminating the risk of production bottlenecks due to off-site trucking. We've also reduced operating costs. We've streamlined their waste operations and reduced greenhouse gas emissions, which we'll look at in a moment here. One thing that was really important to this customer was the capital efficiency of our service model. It meant to them very minimal CapEx investment, which was a tremendous win. So one last thing before we finish this particular case study. We've talked about trucking and incineration. It's not only very expensive, but many of your companies have specific targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. As I talked about, this just doesn't really align with ESG commitments. We've found that typically rinse streams trucked off-site generate between 100 to 200 tons per year that can be displaced with an on-site treatment system such as ours. We'll move on to case study number 2. So as I said, this case study, the objective was at the site was to just have API destruction to achieve PNEC. So this case study is going to demonstrate how we used membrane technology to concentrate the API before electrochemical oxidation to achieve that PNEC in the receiving water. So the background on it is there's a new production line at a formulation plant that manufactures animal health products to treat and prevent disease and parasitic infections in companion animals. So this new line generates about 5,000 gallons per day or 19 cubic meters per day of rinse water contaminated with the antimicrobial API. The API is not regulated, but the company wants to achieve PNEC of 3 parts per million in the receiving water. And that's an interesting thing. If you're in Europe, you might be scratching your head on this. Yep, there's a lot of places in the world that don't regulate any antiparasitics and the discharge of that. In Europe, it's very common. Where this particular facility is located, it is not. So this customer is going above and beyond because they recognize that it is harmful for the environment, and they are committed to treating that. So we collaborated with this customer to develop the project. We signed a master service agreement for Axine to treat the wastewater under a multi-year service agreement. And here we've got table in the bottom left again, shows the influent wastewater specification. So we've got about 4,000 micrograms per liter of the API, about 1,000 milligrams per liter of the COD. And then notable here is that there is presence of fats, oils, and greases, fogs, of about 100 milligrams per liter, and that will get addressed with the Axine system. Again, we conducted treatability testing before we went through ahead and did that final design of the system. So the goal here again was to reduce that API from 4,000 micrograms per liter down to about 300 micrograms per liter, or 3 parts per million PNEC in the receiving water. There is dilution factors in play here that we have to take into consideration. You can see in the chart and table that we were able to achieve target treatment with about 70% COD reduction. So again, just a reminder, we've got COD on the left-hand side here in milligrams per liter, APIs on the right in micrograms per liter, and then of course the time, the run time on the x-axis. So you can see here, we've got the API target treatment was achieved here, 300 micrograms per liter, and COD was about 70% reduction here. So as you can see here, the design is pretty different from the previous case study. In this system, we've got 4 steps. So first we've got pre-treatment here. And in this step, we've got pH adjustment and ultrafiltration, and that ultrafiltration there is to remove the fats, oils, and greases. It's then transferred rather to separation and conditioning, where we've got an RO system where the APIs are concentrated into a reject stream. That reject is then treated by the Axine system, and then it goes to the treated water tank for verification and discharge. The RO clean permeate is also transferred to the treated water tank for discharge. So we've got reject going here and the permeate coming across here directly to that treated water tank. So again, I talked about the RO. So, well, I talked about ultrafiltration. We'll talk about the RO here now. Why did we use RO here? We used it to concentrate the APIs into a reject. This then allows us to treat a higher concentration and a lower volume. So that substantially improves the efficiency and reduces the cost for the system here. So as you can see in this isometric diagram, we've got this entire treatment system in one 20-foot container and two 40-foot containers. And here is that system installed on site. And then here's a few shots of that system. We've got the Axine reactors here. We've got the ultrafiltration, the RO, and an HMI. And we're pressed for time, but I just want to show a few additional examples of projects we're actively working on. So I know for a lot of you, you want to see how many APIs we're treating, what the flow rate is, how much their COD is. So here's just a few examples. Again, we're pressed for time, so I'm not going to go over this in detail. You'll have a copy of this. But as a result of Axine's continuous investment in hardware and software, our customers are receiving enhanced technology and performance. We're specializing in treating pharmaceutical wastewater and treating APIs. So again, you see this where there's 22 APIs. That is not a problem for us. So if you'd like to get started with a project with Axine, here's how to get started. You can set up a call with Laurent or I to discuss your site's challenges and goals. We'll use that preliminary info you share to develop a preliminary proposal. Once we've got enough info, we can turn that around in a couple of weeks. And then when you're ready, we move into treatability testing. And this takes about 6 weeks once we've got the water on site in our lab. And then a few more weeks for us to develop that final proposal. We then execute a service agreement, and finally execution of the installation, the build, the install, and the operation of the system. And so with that, I will turn it back to Chris. And I know, like he said, he might have some questions here. Let me see if I can turn my camera back on.
There you are, Krista. Hey, thanks so much. I think that was a really informative, speedy 45 minutes going through a number of the situations and giving some great case histories. I'm sure we have a lot of questions. And again, I think our sales team would be glad to answer them if you didn't get them answered today in your chats. One particular question is just the last slide. You talked about running treatability. Do you do on-site pilots? Is that required, or how is that best served in preparing a cost and proposal?
Yeah, so we prefer to do that in our lab in Vancouver, but of course there's cases where piloting is more appropriate. Times when that would be more appropriate would be one, if there's risk of extreme degradation. We don't require a lot of, we don't want preservation per se of the water, but we do need it to be like climate controlled, and hopefully, fresh is best. So get it to us as fast as possible. We ship it fast, and once you've collected it, hopefully you get it to us quickly. In the case where we are concerned about degradation, then that would be a good candidate for a pilot. If it's highly variable, the wastewater, then that would be another candidate for that. And then of course, if there was any controlled substances, it might be better suited to do that on site versus sending it to us, as there's a lot of permitting that goes into that.
Okay, great. Let's take one more question. Some of the plants have more than 20 APIs, maybe 50, maybe 75 different APIs in one sample base. Can your system handle that kind of variability?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we find also with that is some of those, and I'll even go back on the slides here. So some of these ones that are up here, so where there might be 10, for example, that we see here, they might actually have 100, but it's just that 10 of them are actually problematic. So that's where a previous slide, and I know from last week, there was a lot of questions about wanting to know more about the high impact studies. and the air assessments and the RQ values. And we absolutely plan to do some follow-up with that and have another webinar or panel rather, so that you guys can learn more about that. That's why that stuff is so important, because you really want to know what are the true problem ones, because you might have 100 APIs and that's really common, but they might not all be problematic. So identifying what are the problematic ones. But as we see here, we've got 22 in one case. It's not a problem. You know, we've got a lot of ways to look at that. We run the treatability on it. And we're very experienced in destroying these and breaking down these molecules to their basic elements.
Great, thanks. Well, that's very comprehensive. Krista, thank you for a great job today and well prepared and well presented webinar. I would like to thank everybody that listened today and for your many questions. For the questions we couldn't get to, someone from Axine will follow up and provide you an answer if you didn't get it today. As we said at the beginning, the webinar will be loaded onto our YouTube channel next week, and we'll also be sending out a link in an email. If you would like to discuss, as we said at the beginning, privately and confidentially, any site details and want to get some responses, please let us know. We'll be glad to do this. We will be sending out a short survey and a new web browser tab once the webinar ends. We'd really appreciate your feedback. So we are truly genuinely dedicated to getting the pharma active ingredients out of our waterways. We hope you will consider a follow-up discussion with our team to review your current situation, discuss how Axine can help you meet your PI goals. Thanks again and have a great week.
Thanks.